federal agencies. But he's not so happy that he's been blocked from removing Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, at least for now. Cook's attorney, Abby Lowell, joins us in a moment.
Also ahead, the Supreme Court rejects a Republican effort to weaken mail-in voting. The two new cases could mean other restrictions are on the horizon. We'll explain soon.
Also breaking tonight, the president says the bipartisan bill to address our country's housing crisis is, quote, a yawn. Instead, he's dead set on forcing through his unpopular voter suppression legislation. But we begin with that breaking news on Donald Trump bragging about an expansion of new executive power that was handed to him by the Supreme Court's conservative supermajority. Here's the president just a short time ago.
The Slaughter case was the big case today. That was really a big case because it gave strength to presidents and strength to the presidency.
The Supreme Court just affirmed your right to fire the heads of independent agencies. Should we expect more firings as a result of this ruling?
I don't think so. It gives me the right, and not me, it gives a president the right to do what the president should have the right to do.
Trump also boasted that the court greatly increased, quote, presidential power at a time when it is most needed. So what exactly will he do with this newly granted power?
And today, in a 6-3 ruling along ideological lines, the Supreme Court ruled that Trump can fire Rebecca Slaughter from the Federal Trade Commission. This overturns a unanimous decision from the court in 1935 that protected the independence of government agency. This move effectively gives Trump and any future president free rein to fire those who staff these agencies. And in a concurring opinion, Justice Neil Gorsuch wrote, independent agencies are not so independent after all.
Justice Sonia Sotomayor, defiantly reading for her dissent from the bench, said, quote, today, this court undoes centuries of political practice and concludes that all three branches of government have been acting in open defiance of the Constitution all this time. Its conclusion is wrong. Yet, the court is making an exception for the independence at the Federal Reserve, for now, at least. In a separate 5-4 decision, the court ruled Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook can keep her job as she fights bogus mortgage fraud claims from Trump and his allies. Tonight, Lisa Cook's lawyer, Abby Lowell, is with us. And here we are, this sort of melting pot of very different Supreme Court decisions. One with respect to the Slaughter case, the FTC. Yeah, Donald Trump can fire everybody. Bah. But the Federal Reserve, that bastion of economic ideal, that golden star, can't touch that. I know what else to make of it other than the court is basically saying, let's get past this right now because of the political consequences attendant with messing with the market right before a political election in November.
I mean, I said to you earlier, Mr. Chairman, on our call, I said it's the lipstick legacy of John Roberts, right? He always puts a little bit of lipstick on the pig, if you will. Right. And in this case, it was, I'm going to greatly enhance the imperial presidency, the unitary executive theory, as the legal term is known, where the executive branch is consolidated with so much power that can freely pretty much do whatever it pleases. However, in this case, I'm going to say that that doesn't necessarily apply to the Fed. Now, why is that? We have someone who can answer that question for us very soon. But I think it plays into this constant we've seen from this court, which is that they're always splitting hairs. They're always interpreting things in these ways that you believe are inherently political. And I agree with you, especially timing wise. But it's not something that when we've seen an administration that is so happy to do away with any types of norms being strengthened by a Supreme Court.
That's the part.
With 2 more years left in this administration.
That's crazy.
It's tough.
I mean, Sotomayor's dissent, which she read from the bench, which is a bit of an unusual move, is worth listening to in full. And she calls out what you two just called out and calls it this ad hoc historical exception that Roberts and the other justices decided to make when it came to monetary policy. There's so many interesting contradictions between these two decisions that I'm very excited to ask Abby Lowell about.
Go ahead. Let's ask him.
I mean, do you see a coherent legal principle that is a through line between these two opinions, or is it what Clarence Thomas says in his dissent of the Cook case, which pokes holes in the Slaughter case.
The reality is there is a line, and people have to understand the line goes something like this. To begin with, what the court had to deal with in Governor Cook's case is an unusual proceeding. We were at the Supreme Court to preserve an injunction at the district lower court level on an emergency docket, which wasn't so emergency because she's been allowed to keep her job for months, whereas the Slaughter case was in a different procedural posture. That's number one. So we do go back to the district court, but we don't go back to the district court empty-handed. We go back to the district court with the Supreme Court's majority decision pointing out what is and is not good cause to do something with a Federal Reserve Board governor. So that's first line. Second line is that the Federal Reserve Board is unique. It is a historic, different agency than all the other agencies. It is not purely ground in the executive branch. It's an independent bank. It used to be owned by private and public. It does have a unique status. If you add those things together, you can put a line, as you're asking, between the two cases. Now, that doesn't mean that the court's 6-3 opinion in Slaughter is something that people shouldn't be concerned about. I mean, not only does it take away a check and balance that the Constitution is supposed to have with three branches looking over each other's shoulder, but it forgets that these independent agencies were not started by judiciary and not by the executive. Congress was involved, and that is a little upsetting. But I want people to understand that there is something unique about the Fed, and the good news today, that institution, which needs to be independent and not allow somebody like Donald Trump to infuse it with politics, has been preserved at a much higher burden that a president has said he has, even when it came to that agency. And that's a good piece of news today.
Okay, so I don't know if I buy what you just sold. I get the idea that the Fed is unique in that it touches money. But a lot of the FTC, y'all know what the FTC does, right? Right? So you know what the Federal Trade Commission and all the other executive organs out there that have been created by Congress do. They touch on aspects of your life in a way that have a tripling and a quadrupling effect on families and communities out there.
You want to look at this as a policy issue, and I understand that.
Exactly.
But let me give you a legal context. One of the things that makes the Fed different is the following. It has a statute. It has an organic statute. The statute in it has as one of its clauses that a governor can be removed for cause. It is an agency with a fixed term of 14 years. History in the law indicates that when you have the combination of a fixed term for that period of time, with Senate confirmation and a for-cause removal, then it requires more from a president than it would be if it's a cabinet member or even an independent agency without that history, without that term, and without that clause.
I just one more point on that. So Abby, where I would land on what you just said is, given this court and what this court has already shown its propensity to do, in that it has not only bought the idea of a unitary executive, it has created the judicial or the legal status for a unitary executive, that this case today was just a pause, that this court, in subsequent cases that are now being fermented out there across the country to come before this court, will go after this Federal Reserve before Donald Trump leaves office. Trust me on that one.
Well, look, the president has shown anything. It's not his reluctance to press the boundaries of the law, the policy, the ethics, the morality, you name the adverb or the adjective. But the Supreme Court did something important today. It set out that a president, whether it be somebody as ill-motived as Donald Trump or somebody who just thinks that the Fed ought to be doing something different for all the right reasons, if that's possible, can't just do it the way it does it for every other agency, both in terms of what the process a federal governor is required to get and what would or would not be cause for removing in that statute has been set out by the court. I mean, one of the things that was interesting today was that it was a 5-4 decision. After the argument in January, people thought it might even be a bigger swing than that. And I think one of the reasons it was close was two things. One, the court went out of its way to definitively state that this statute, this Federal Reserve statute, is constitutional with its provision for cause and less power to the president. whereas it ruled that a similar statute for independent agencies was unconstitutional. That's the yin and the yang. The second thing it did is, in cause, it said, okay, we're going to look to what's called the common law, so the president shouldn't just trifle with it. I think what you're asking is this. Should people at the same time be grateful, maybe relieved that the Federal Reserve Board stands independent? It should. Should people be concerned that this court is willing to give what the president said is the power that he thinks he deserves as the president, more power against 90 years of this precedent in the law, and in the way we hope that one branch of the government will check the power? They should be equally concerned as they should be grateful about the other decision.
I want to talk to you about Bill Pulte, if that's okay, because Bill Pulte is now our acting DNI director. But before he got this job, not confirmed, by the way, but he's our acting, he was the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency. And he is the one who brought up these allegations of mortgage fraud against your client. He said on X today, as I've repeatedly said, I believe Lisa Cook will be indicted for mortgage fraud. Two-part question. A, your response to that, and then B, is Bill Pulte qualified to be the DNI director?
All right, so the answers to all those questions fit together. Not only did Bill Pulte make this baseless allegation against Federal Reserve Board Governor Cook, which started that, also did that earlier with New York State Attorney General Letitia James, who I help advise, and has done so for Senator Adam Schiff and others. There's a couple of things about that so-called mortgage fraud. As we pointed out in the Cook briefs, it's really interesting that these same alleged disparate entries on mortgage applications were done by members of Donald Trump's cabinet, and you don't see him asking them to resign. Back to your question about, Bill Pulte. He took an agency, the FHFA, that was put in place to help Americans get better housing, more affordable mortgage, and turned it into a mini FBI as part of the weaponization of this administration. That is not something that people should not, they should not forget that that's what he did. And now he's at DNI. And DNI is an agency where he could do the exact same thing. And I know it's supposed to be temporary, but he's there for now and how long. To answer your question about his competence to do that, I don't have a good analogy, but putting Bill Pulte in charge of DNI would be like putting Mr. Magoo in charge of building your house safely.
I do think real quickly that if you have someone who's in charge of an obscure housing agency, and they're able to weaponize that, one can only imagine what will happen when you have the entire disposal of the U.S. and national intelligence apparatus ready to go.
Abby, it does seem like, though, that the justices left the door open for the president to try again to remove Lisa Cook. So how are you preparing today, despite this victory?
So it's what I said before, Jackie. They didn't just send it back without any owner manual.
Yeah.
There's a little owner manual. And we will use what the court said, because there are many important principles in the majority opinion that sets out a couple of things. There are two challenges we made to the dismissal of Governor Cook. One is that it was done for improper purposes, perhaps pretextual, as we may have to prove.
Right.
But the second is that they didn't give her the proper notice and opportunity to be heard that everybody should get in the due process clause in the Constitution of the United States. So the Supreme Court sent it back, which is, remember, we were in an emergency. Please don't take the merits, which was what some of the dissenters were talking about, by the way, which is why are we delving into this at this point? All right, that said, it goes back with parameters. It goes back with some binding principles. And I know that in a moment of peak, Donald Trump revealed his hand again when he weaponizes his agencies by already saying, guess what? We're going to do it again, or we're going to take the full effort of the law to go after her again. By the way, when the Supreme Court says, give her due process and make it for cause, and the president of the United States says, I've already made up my mind, he's probably proved the point of what the Supreme Court was trying to protect against.
So, Abby, before we let you go, I want to broaden out the conversation a little bit, because you are a well-versed lawyer who's been a student of not just the practice, but the history, and understand how these pieces come together. When you see a court that is so ready to undo precedent, stare decisis, the idea that these so-called conservative justices berated Democratic administrations and Democratic nominees over this idea of originalism and the history of the things, that they're so willing to crap all over that. And that's
a legal phrase.
That is the nicest way I can put it at this hour of the day. What does it say that a future Congress and a future administration need to do with respect to the direction our court is heading and just how quickly they have submerged themselves into the quicksand of politics?
Well, that is the yin and the yang. I'm using that phrase a lot today of that point. Look, Supreme Court precedents are supposed to have some bearing in time. And in extraordinary circumstances, and we've had a few in our country, most significantly in the 19th century, the decision in Plessy versus Ferguson that stood for too long before it was eradicated later in the 20th century. It is possible and important at some point to look at stare decisis and say, we made a mistake. That's supposed to be the exception to the rule and not the rule. And over the last decades, especially in things important as women's ability to pick their medical treatment themselves and other such fundamental rights, there has been the ability to not pay much attention to stare decisis. Why is that? People are debating it. I think there are a few reasons. I think one is the politicization of the courts, where people are picked with a litmus test, where another issue is that we have lifetime appointments for all the judges, including the Supreme Court. The third is that the President of the United States in his first term and in this term has basically said to the world, when they do what I want, they're right. When they do what I don't want, they're wrong. And there's a lot of reasons, but that's one.
Well, that last one, right? Abby Lowell, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Good to be here.
Stay with us, folks. After the break, a major win for voting rights today, but the Supreme Court also set stage for what could be an even bigger assault on our elections in the future. We'll explain all of that. And later, Congressman Chris Deluzio joins the table. Trump's assault on mail-in voting, ruling that states are free to count mail-in ballots that arrive after Election Day as long as they're postmarked by Election Day. Now, who would have thought of that? It's a loss for the RNC and for Donald Trump, who attacks mail-in voting constantly. You've heard him, despite the fact that he votes by mail himself every time. But the court signaled major voting rights battles are still to come before the next presidential election. Got to pay attention here, because the justices said they'll consider 2 Arizona laws that would require proof of citizenship to register to vote. And they also left the door open to a hearing, a dispute out of Pennsylvania after, over whether mail-in ballots that don't have a handwritten date on their outer envelope can be thrown out. Little things, right? Joining us at the table, Kristen Clark, General Counsel at the NAACP and former Assistant Attorney General for the Justice Department Civil Rights Division, and Mark Joseph Stern, Senior Writer for Slate and co-host of the Amicus podcast.
Thank you both for joining us. Kristen, I'm going to start with you because I think some of us were surprised today with that ruling going in favor of mail-in balloting, and there is euphoria in some corners of the country. And then Michael Steele came on our call earlier and he said, yeah, but.
Yeah, but.
The yeah, but. Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about the yeah, but. The yeah, but is full screen here. SCOTUS will hear Arizona voting citizenship case from Politico. Supreme Court to decide whether states can impose proof of citizenship requirements on voting registration. The High Court accepted an appeal from the Republican National Committee to review a lower court decision that found provisions of the state's 2022 voting law, which would require people to show proof of citizenship to register to vote, violated the Federal National Voter Registration Act of 1993. Any ruling could have major implications ahead of the 2028 elections. So, if you listen to Michael Steele, he'll say there are Republican lawyers all around the country trying to find ways to get to the Supreme Court about limiting voting in the 2028 election. The fact that they singled this Arizona case today, what does that mean for democracy and what does that mean for voting?
Yeah. Well, let's not rain on the parade yet. This is a great win for democracy today. It was great being in the courtroom and, hearing Justice Barrett read the ruling. We know that voters across the country like absentee ballots. We know that folks in rural parts of the country, people with disabilities, emergency personnel, our men and women who serve abroad, all rely on absentee balloting as a way to ensure that their voices are heard. So a good win for democracy today. But the decision turns in large part on the court giving deference to the state's preference here. Mississippi's law says we'll accept the ballot if it's postmarked by Election Day, even if it comes in several days later. And as we look to Arizona and Pennsylvania, we need to brace ourselves for a Supreme Court that may want to give deference to Arizona that's pushing forward this mini SAVE Act law that really imposes tremendous burdens on voters who want to register to vote, right? Providing a copy of your passport or your birth certificate should not be a burden placed on anyone who wants to exercise the right to vote in modern day democracy.
I do think it's worth reading part of Amy Coney Barrett's majority decision in this case, because at this point it's sort of refreshing to see an originalist actually abide by originalist thinking, asking the question about, you know, what did the framers actually mean when they were using the phrase Election Day? Well, the Election Day statutes require the electorate's choice to be made on Election Day. But the Election Day statutes do not set a deadline for ballot receipt. The Election Day statutes say nothing about ballot receipt, and we cannot add to the words Congress chose. Mark Joseph, I always love asking you about these coalitions that appear within the justices, because I know you watch them very closely. So I'm basically going to ask you the same question Luke asked, but in a different way. Do you think that this Barrett's-Roberts coalition is going to hold?
So this is the very first time in her tenure that Amy Coney Barrett has joined with John Roberts and the three liberals in a merits decision. So I don't think this is going to happen again for a while. It's been 6 years. It could be another 6 more. Now, maybe I'm being pessimistic, but I do think that this was a really kind of fringe case from the beginning. I am also happy that it came out the way it did. I'm terrified that it was 9-0, that it was not 9-0. It clearly should have been, right? There is no federal statute, as Justice Barrett said, that says that these ballots have to arrive by Election Day, that they must be counted by Election Day. You can search the statute books. It's just not there. And so the plaintiffs here, the Republican National Committee, wanted to make up a law and just have the court impose it. And Barrett drew the line there with Chief Justice Roberts, and I respect them for that. It's much better than the alternative. But again, like Justice Kavanaugh sided with Alito, who filled his dissent with all kinds of horrible rhetoric that promotes Trump's conspiracy theories about ballot fraud and election theft and election integrity being undermined by the court. That is just going to fuel the flames that Trump is trying to set in advance of the 2026 election. I don't think the Chief and Barrett were willing to go there. I think they had more common sense. I think they were willing to be good textualists and originalists. But again, it's rare that the stars align in that way, and I don't expect it to happen again very soon.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one, Mark Joseph. I don't expect the stars align that way, because the stars are already foretelling where this court intends to go, in my estimation. My colleague and friend just laid that out, where I stand with this. But I do, for the purposes, because we're having this conversation again, want to go back on the record, as I tried to be very consistent in my view on this, as someone who ran Republican parties at the county level, the state level, and the national level. The races we won, the races we lost, could not have occurred effectively without mail-in ballots, because it is the core of what we would do as a political organization. So for those of you who are a little slow on the history, have given up on your civics lessons, I just want to share with everybody here in the country just a thought about mail-in ballots. Between 1861 and 1865, guess what was happening?
Civil War.
It was a civil war.
That little thing.
Mail-in ballots were introduced for soldiers. And yes, you know who that included? Those Confederate scallywags who were terrorists and who had broken from the Union. Yes, they could still vote by mail while they were prosecuting their insurrection. Late 1800s, expansion of mail-in ballots to include civilian absentee voting. Okay? 2020, significant increase in mail-in voting due to the pandemic. America, wake the hell up. We've been doing this since 1861. What is your problem? Oh, I know what your problem is. You're listening to an idiot who votes by mail. So help me understand what the rest of this should look like versus what it is looking like, because the American people need to get this right.
Yeah, right. Now is the time to stay focused. There's a midterm election cycle underway, and there is a war on voters, a campaign that is all about disenfranchising voters and silencing them this election cycle. We are still contending with the fallout from the Calais decision, and I want to make sure we do not lose sight of that. The attack on black voters and black voting districts in the South is truly one of the most despicable moments in our democracy. But we need to make sure that voters get out this election cycle. And at the NAACP, every day, we are going to be working hard to make sure that people are registered, that they have a plan to vote, that if they need to vote by mail and the laws in their state allow them to do so, that they do so freely. But we reject the rhetoric, and we understand that this is all part of a coordinated campaign to peel off and silence, in particular, black and brown voters this election season, and we're not going to stand for it.
Afraid of us at the ballot box.
Scallywag on cable TV. Michael Steele, you're an impressive fella. Mark, real quick one before we go to break. Tomorrow, another big day of the Supreme Court. Yeah. Birthright, citizenship. How do we read those tea leaves so far?
I think it's very clear that the court will rule in favor of birthright citizenship because at least 6 or 7 justices are capable of reading the first sentence of the 14th Amendment. And again, I think this illustrates just how low the bar is these days for the Supreme Court. Like, these cases should all be 9-0. And the fact that we're anxiously counting heads is a very disturbing sign about what kind of fringe theories can snowball into something that might gain a majority of votes. So these are good decisions. I think birthright will be good. Please do not let it distract us from the slew of awful decisions that the Supreme Court has issued this term, especially those that have hindered democracy, that have limited the right to vote, that have made it harder for us to maintain a constitutional republic. Those are the cases that matter the most to John Roberts. And when he hands down his birthright citizenship case and then, goes away for the summer, he wants us to forget all about it and just say, yay to the chief, hail to the chief, he did one good thing. I will not be playing that game. I encourage you not to play it either.
That's the lipstick legacy. There's always a little bit of lipstick on the pig.
That pig is still ugly.
It's a big, big pig. Kristen Clark and Mark Joseph Stern, thank you so much for being on the show. I think we might talk about the Supreme Court tomorrow, folks, just a guess. In just a moment, the president calls a wildly popular bipartisan bill, quote, a yawn, while demanding his unpopular voter suppression be forced through the House by MAGA Mike Johnson. That's next, only on the Weeknight.
अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं जो दिन सहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा बेसर्द लगता है दिल का हर एक कोना अब बहुत ही दूर भरता है अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं ये जो दिन सुहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा सर्द लगता है दिल का हर एक कोना बहुत खोने की राहों में ये आंसू बहने लगते हैं कहाँ जाऊं कहाँ ढूंढूं मेरा वो साजो सामा तो मेरी हर एक तमन्ना तू मेरी रूह का मकान कहानी में फकत एक गम ही लिखा था सितारों से भी पूछता है पता तेरा कहाँ होगा मगर खामोश है दुनिया कहाँ मेरा जहाँ होगा बस एक बार मुड़ के देख ले मेरी बेबसी की सूरत मुझे है आज भी तेरी वफा की सख्त जरूरत साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर